Welcome to Shredder Fanfic. Like, subscribe, and hype video. Join members to gain early access to new videos.
After the main character dies, he wakes up inside of Twilight and he realizes he has every single grimoire from the anime Black Clover. What will he do inside of Twilight with every single grimoire from Black Clover?
Jasper spoke quietly. "We can rotate," he said. "One stays with Bella's area. The rest move." Carlisle nodded. "Yes," he said. "Rosalie and Emmett maintain the outer and middle ring. Jasper stays close enough to respond." "Edward." Edward's eyes snapped to Carlisle, tense. Carlisle's voice stayed even. "Edward goes with the hunt," he said. "Because he will not accept being left behind, and because he will be more controlled if he is involved." Edward didn't look grateful. He just looked tense and focused. Carlisle looked at me again. "Kai leads the tracking," he said. "We follow the mark. We do not enter town at speed. We keep it in the forest." Alice exhaled hard, then nodded quickly. "I'll stay back and watch Bella's choice lines," she said, still annoyed but accepting. Esme wasn't here in the woods, but I could picture her worry. She'd hate this. She'd accept it anyway. Edward stepped closer to me, eyes sharp. "If she turns back toward Bella," he said, tight, "we stop everything." "Yeah," I said evenly. "That's the rule." Jasper's gaze stayed steady. "We move," he said. We did. I followed the pull of the tracking thread into the deeper trees, keeping my pace controlled enough that the world didn't sound like it was cracking behind us. Edward moved at my shoulder, tense and ready. Carlisle stayed close behind, calm and precise. Jasper moved like a quiet guard, attention split between the forest and Edward's emotional state. The thread tugged north, then west, away from town and away from Charlie's road. Victoria was retreating, angry, and likely searching for a safer place to reset. I kept my focus tight, not letting myself drift into anything careless. I could feel Edward's impatience in the way he moved, in the way his head turned too often toward every shadow. "Stay with the thread," I said quietly. Edward's eyes snapped to me. "I am," he said tight. I nodded. "Good," I replied. We pushed deeper, rain still falling, forest thick, the world quiet except for our movement. And the thread stayed taut, pulling us forward, because Victoria was still running. Chapter 9, Clean Trap and Split Lines. The tracking thread stayed tight as we moved deeper into the forest. I kept my pace controlled, not because I couldn't move faster, but because speed made noise and noise made problems. Edward stayed beside me, close enough that I could feel how hard he was holding himself back. Carlisle followed a few steps behind, calm and steady. Jasper moved on the other side, eyes scanning wide, attention split between the woods and the way Edward's tension kept rising and falling in small pulses. The rain was lighter out here, filtered through branches. The ground was slick. Wet leaves stuck to my shoes. Edward's head snapped toward a darker patch between trees. "She doubled back," he said tightly. I shook my head once. "No," I replied calmly. "She veered left." The thread didn't fold. Edward's jaw clenched. "You're sure?" he said, clipped. "Yes," I said. "The mark is still pulling the same direction." Carlisle's voice was even behind us. "Edward," he said gently, "trust the tool." Edward didn't answer. He kept moving. Jasper glanced at Edward, then at me. "How far does the mark reach?" he asked quietly. "Far enough," I said. "It gets weaker with distance, but it doesn't vanish unless I release it or she leaves the region completely." Jasper nodded once. "So she can't hide by sitting still," he said. "She can sit still," I replied. "But I'll still know where she is." Edward's shoulders tightened at that. He looked like he wanted to sprint. I kept my tone light on purpose. If we catch her clean, I said, you can glare at her all you want. Edward shot me a look full of irritation. I smiled back anyway. The thread tugged harder, then shifted slightly downward. Victoria was getting closer. That usually meant she had slowed to listen, or she had hit rough terrain and adjusted, or she thought she had shaken us and was starting to plan instead of run. I stopped and lifted my hand slightly, palm facing down. Edward froze instantly, muscles tense. Jasper stopped too, calm but ready. Carlyle halted behind us without a sound. What? Edward asked, low. She's close enough that she can hear us if we step wrong, I said quietly. Edward's eyes narrowed. I can't hear her yet, he said. I can, I replied, and I didn't bother explaining the difference. I wasn't using vampire hearing. I was reading presence and movement through the mark and the pressure shifts around it. Jasper's gaze sharpened. She's watching, he murmured. Yes, I said. Carlyle stepped closer, voice steady. We do this cleanly, he said. No damage that draws attention. Edward's jaw clenched. She already drew attention, he said tightly. Carlyle kept his tone even. And we prevented it from becoming worse, he replied. Edward didn't argue. He just stared into the trees like he could force Victoria to appear. I dropped my awareness inward and chose what I wanted. Not one chain line. Not one seal. A full containment set. I pulled from multiple grimoires at once, stacking the effects so the result would be simple. Victoria would be trapped without needing me to wrestle her for it. I spoke quietly, mostly to the Cullens so they'd move with it. I'm going to lock the area, I said. When she hits resistance, she'll try to bolt. Jasper, cut her angle. Edward, don't tackle until she's pinned. Carlyle, stay back and watch the edges. Edward's eyes narrowed. Why do you get to tell me what to do? He said tightly. I looked at him calmly. Because you want Bella alive, I replied evenly. And because you're too mad to run the timing. Edward's face tightened. His hands curled, then relaxed. Jasper spoke low. He's right, he said to Edward. Edward's eyes flashed at Jasper, then he forced himself still. Fine, he said flatly. Carlyle nodded once. Do it, he said calmly. I stepped forward alone. The thread tugged again. Victoria was ahead, slightly downhill, near a cluster of larger trees where the ground dipped and the undergrowth thickened. It was a good place to hide. It was also a good place to trap something fast, because there weren't many clean straight paths. I set the first layer. Field anchors snapped into place through the soil and wet leaves, invisible, spread in a wide circle around the area where the thread felt strongest. The anchor wasn't loud. It didn't shake the trees. It just existed. If something crossed the boundary at speed, it would catch and report. Then I set the second layer. Path limits. This one wasn't a wall. It was a bias, a gentle pressure that made certain directions feel heavier to move through. Not enough to stop a human. Enough to slow a vampire for one beat. One beat was all I needed. I moved another few steps, then stopped. Victoria appeared like a pale flash between trunks, not running, just shifting into view to confirm what she already knew. She stared at me with open hatred. Her face was still. Her red hair was wet and darkened by rain. Her eyes looked bright in the dim light. She didn't speak. I smiled politely. You're making this a routine, I said softly. Her lips curled back from her teeth. Edward made a low sound behind me, like a restrained growl. Jasper's posture sharpened. Carlyle stayed calm, but his attention locked on Victoria. Victoria's eyes flicked past me, toward Edward. Then her gaze returned to me. She moved. Fast. Not directly at me this time. She tried to slip around, going for the gap where she thought the circle ended. She hit the path limit. Her stride stuttered for a fraction of a second. In that fraction, I cast. Chains snapped out of the air in a wide net, not thrown like a rope, but formed around her mid-run. They wrapped her ankles, then her knees, then her torso. She hit the ground hard, mud spraying. Victoria shrieked, furious, and tore at the chains with brute strength. I layered sealing magic immediately. The chains tightened and locked, pinning her like a restraint harness pressed into the ground. Victoria thrashed again, harder, but the seal held. Edward lunged forward. "Wait," I said sharply. Edward froze mid-step, jaw clenched, eyes wild. He looked like it physically hurt him to obey. Jasper moved into position without hesitation, cutting off the slope side so if she broke free she wouldn't have a clean path. Carlyle stepped closer, voice calm. "She's contained," he said evenly. "Edward." Edward's chest rose and fell in a controlled pattern that looked like breathing even though it wasn't. Victoria stopped thrashing for a second, eyes burning up at us. Her gaze locked onto Edward with raw hate. Edward's voice was low. "You," he said. Victoria hissed, teeth bared. I kept my expression light and my tone practical. "Okay," I said. "Now we talk about where we put you." Edward's head snapped toward me. "We don't put her anywhere," he said tightly. "We end it." Carlyle's voice stayed steady. "Not like this," he said gently. Edward's hands clenched. "She will keep coming," he said, voice tight. "I know," Carlyle replied evenly. Jasper's gaze stayed on Victoria. "She's not afraid," he murmured. "No," I said. "She's stubborn." Victoria snarled again, then twisted hard, trying to injure herself to slip out. The chains cut into her skin. She tore her own shoulder partially out of its socket. The sound was wet and sharp in the rain. Edward's face tightened with disgust and rage. I didn't flinch. I simply tightened the seal again and added anti-magic through the chain links. Victoria's movement slowed abruptly, like her body hit resistance that wasn't muscle. Her eyes widened slightly. "Stop doing that," Emmett's voice came from behind the trees. He appeared a second later, moving fast but controlled, with Rosalie near him. Their faces were tense, and Emmett looked irritated like he'd missed the start. Rosalie's gaze fixed on Victoria with cold disgust. "Pathetic," she said flatly. Victoria hissed at Rosalie. Emmett looked at the chains around Victoria and then at me, eyebrows raised. "So you caught her," he said. "Yeah," I replied cheerfully. "It wasn't complicated." Edward's glare cut toward Emmett for daring to sound casual. Carlyle looked at Emmett and Rosalie. "You maintained the perimeter near Charlie's," he said evenly. Rosalie nodded, sharp. "Yes," she said. "No movement there." Emmett jerked his head. "Nothing near the house," he confirmed. "Bella's still inside." Edward's shoulders loosened by a tiny amount, relief leaking out before he forced it back down. Victoria took advantage of that tiny shift and surged again, trying to break free. The seal held. I stepped closer, crouched slightly, and looked directly into Victoria's eyes. My voice stayed calm. "You can keep doing that," I said evenly. "You'll keep losing pieces." Victoria's lips pulled back further. Edward's voice was tight. "Where is she hiding?" he demanded at Victoria. Victoria didn't answer. Rosalie made a quiet sound of annoyance. "She's not going to talk," she said coldly. Carlyle's expression stayed composed. We are not interrogating her here, he said evenly. Edward's head snapped toward Carlyle. Then where, he said. Carlyle didn't raise his voice. Somewhere that isn't near a human home, he said. Jasper's gaze sharpened. We need to move, he said quietly. If she thrashes long enough, something will crack. A sound will carry. Alice's voice came through Edward's phone speaker, fast and tense. She's not done, she said. She's trying to create something else. She already decided it. Carlyle's eyes narrowed slightly. What? He asked. Alice's voice sped up. Human distraction, she said quickly. On the highway. A car. She planned it before she ran. Someone else is involved. Edward went still. Someone else, he repeated, tight. Alice swallowed audibly. Not another vampire with her, she clarified quickly, frustrated. A human she already positioned. She's trying to make you split. Carlyle's posture tightened, still calm but immediate. We split, he said evenly. Jasper, Emmett go to the highway. Prevent the incident. Rosalie stays with the outer ring toward Charlie's. Edward stays here with me. Kai maintains containment and leads the transport. Edward's head snapped toward Carlyle. No, he said sharply. If we leave. We are not leaving Bella uncovered, Carlyle replied evenly. And we are not allowing a human to die for a diversion. Edward's jaw clenched so hard it looked painful. Jasper's voice was low. I'll go, he said. Emmett nodded immediately. Yeah, he said, already turning. Rosalie's eyes narrowed. I'm staying, she said coldly, as if daring anyone to argue. Carlyle nodded once. Good, he said. Jasper and Emmett moved away fast, their bodies blurring through trees. Edward stared at Victoria, jaw clenched, then looked at me. If she escapes while they're gone, he said tightly. She won't, I said calmly. Edward's eyes narrowed. Don't say that unless you mean it, he said. I smiled faintly. I mean it, I replied. Victoria twisted again like she was trying to prove me wrong. I tightened the seal once more and used a different grimoire layer, spatial lock, not for teleporting, just for keeping her anchored to one point in the ground. It held her center in place so she couldn't wriggle her torso enough to slip. Victoria's movement jerked to a stop. She tried again and failed. Her eyes widened, then narrowed into fury. Edward took a step closer, controlled now, his voice low. You're not touching her, he said. Victoria bared her teeth. Carlyle's tone stayed calm. We need to relocate her, he said. Kai, can you carry her restrained? Yes, I said. Edward's posture tightened. Carry her where? He demanded. Carlyle answered evenly. A controlled location. Away from humans. Somewhere we can monitor her without causing town-level attention. Edward looked like he hated the idea of monitoring instead of destroying. I leaned down toward Victoria, still calm. This is going to be uncomfortable, I said politely. Victoria hissed. I pulled from reinforcement and lifted the entire chain and seal bundle like it was a wrapped object. The magic held her pinned and compact. She struggled, but it was contained. It didn't look like a normal physical restraint. It looked wrong in a way only vampires would notice. Edward watched with a tight expression, disgust and frustration mixed. Move, Carlyle said. We carried her deeper into the forest, away from any roads. Edward paced beside us, tense, scanning constantly. Carlyle moved at a steady pace, calm. Victoria thrashed occasionally, testing. Every time she did, I tightened the lock for a second and she stopped. Edward's voice was sharp. "You're enjoying this," he said, directed at Victoria. Victoria hissed. I glanced at Edward. "She's not enjoying anything," I said lightly. "She's just committed." Edward's eyes flashed at me. "Stop talking like she's reasonable," he said tightly. "I'm talking like she's predictable," I replied calmly. Carlyle spoke gently. "Edward," he said, "focus." Edward's jaw clenched, but he nodded once, stiff. We reached a deeper area where the trees were thicker and the ground dipped again. Carlyle stopped and looked around, assessing. "Here," he said evenly. Edward stepped closer, eyes hard on Victoria. Victoria's eyes locked on him, full of hate. I lowered the sealed bundle carefully onto the ground and then adjusted the spell structure. Instead of a carry lock, I expanded into a containment ring, a circle of anchored pressure points around her, each linked to the field I'd already set. If she pushed one side, the circle would tighten from the opposite side. Simple. Effective. Edward stared at the circle, then at me. "Teach me," he said tightly. Carlyle's eyes flicked to Edward. "Now," he asked, calm. Edward's voice stayed firm. "Now," he said. I nodded. "Fine," I said. "Jasper isn't here, but I can still show the timing." Edward crouched slightly, gaze fixed on the containment. His posture looked stiff, but his attention was sharp. He wasn't joking. He wasn't posturing. He wanted control because it was the only thing keeping him from tearing this forest apart. I pointed with 2 fingers. "This is the anchor," I said. "If she pushes, you don't chase her movement. You hit the anchor point she's trying to break." Edward's eyes narrowed. "How do I hit an anchor?" he asked. "With your body," I said. "You're strong enough. You push the ground where it's tied. Break the soil, not the chain." Edward stared, then shifted his weight slightly like he understood. I continued, calm and clear. "This is the funnel," I said. "If she breaks one line, she'll try to run in the direction that feels lightest. Jasper cuts that angle. You don't go straight at her. You go where she wants to go and block." Edward's jaw clenched. "And if she tries to self-injure," he said tightly. I nodded. "She will," I replied. Edward's eyes flashed with anger. "She can't escape if she can't rotate her shoulders," I said evenly. "So the lock is here." I placed a small chain line across Victoria's upper torso, then tightened it with sealing so it held her shoulder placement without cutting her apart. Victoria hissed. Edward's face tightened with disgust. Carlyle watched with calm attention. "This is precise," he said quietly. "It has to be," I said. "If it's sloppy, it becomes loud." Edward's gaze stayed sharp. "What do I do when she breaks?" he demanded. "You don't let her break," I replied. Edward's eyes narrowed. "That's not an answer," he said, tight. "It is," I said evenly. "You watch her shoulders and hips. You move before she moves. Don't wait for the lunge." Edward stared at Victoria like he was memorizing her anatomy. Victoria glared back. Carlyle's voice stayed calm. "This is enough for now," he said. Edward didn't move away. "No," he said tightly. "I want to be there next time. I want to coordinate with it." "You will," I said calmly. "If you listen." Edward's jaw clenched. "I listen," he said flatly. I smiled faintly. "You try," I replied. Edward glared at me, then looked away. Alice's voice came through the phone again, quicker. "The highway incident is happening," she said. "Emmett and Jasper are close. But the human is already swerving." Carlyle's posture tightened. How many cars? He asked, calm but urgent. 3, Alice said quickly. One is going to clip another. It'll cause a pileup if it happens. Edward's head snapped toward the direction of town, tension rising again. Bella, he said, like it was automatic. Rosalie's voice came through faintly on another line. Charlie's house is still quiet, she said coldly. No movement near Bella. Edward's shoulders loosened slightly again. Carlyle looked at me. Maintain containment, he said evenly. I will go assist Jasper and Emmett if needed. Edward snapped toward Carlyle. No, he said sharply. You stay. I go. Carlyle held Edward's gaze, calm. Edward, he said. Edward's voice was tight. If you leave, and she... Carlyle's tone stayed even. Kai can hold her, he said. You cannot be seen in a highway collision. Edward's jaw clenched. He looked furious. I cut in, calm and practical. Carlyle should go, I said. He's the best at making it look like nothing happened. Edward's eyes flashed at me, but he didn't argue because he knew it was true. Carlyle nodded once. Stay here, he said to Edward. Edward's hands clenched. Fine, he said, like the word tasted bad. Carlyle moved away fast and silent through the trees. Edward stayed with me and Victoria, posture rigid, eyes scanning the dark around us like he expected more vampires to appear. Victoria tested the containment again, subtle this time. Small pressure shifts. Slow twisting. She was looking for weaknesses. The lock held. Edward watched her closely. She won't stop, he said tightly. No, I replied evenly. That's her whole thing right now. Edward's eyes narrowed at my tone. Stop talking like you've met her before, he snapped. I kept my expression light. I'm talking like I've watched patterns, I replied calmly. He didn't answer. He just stared at Victoria. Victoria suddenly jerked her head toward the direction Carlyle went, like she could sense the split. Her eyes narrowed with calculation. Edward noticed. His posture tightened. Don't, he said, voice low. Victoria hissed. I checked the thread. The mark still sat on her. Strong. Stable. No shift. Good. A few minutes passed in tense silence. The rain picked up slightly again. The forest smelled wet and clean, but the air around Victoria felt cold and sharp. Then Alice's voice returned, fast, with a note of relief. They stopped it, she said quickly. No crash. Jasper pushed the driver's emotions down. Emmett redirected the car with minimal movement. Carlyle is wiping the scene. Edward's shoulders lowered slightly. His jaw stayed clenched, but the tension eased by a fraction. Good, I said. Victoria jerked again, angry at the failure. Edward leaned closer, eyes hard. Every time you try to hurt her, he said quietly, you lose. Victoria bared her teeth. I kept my tone calm. Don't get loud, I said to Edward. We still need to be able to leave this place quietly. Edward's eyes snapped to me. I'm not loud, he said flatly. I smiled faintly. Sure, I replied. He glared, then forced himself still again. Carlyle returned not long after, moving calm and precise even at speed. His expression was composed, but his eyes looked focused. It's handled, Carlyle said evenly. Edward didn't relax fully, but his posture shifted. Bella, he said, tight. Still safe, Carlyle replied. Rosalie confirmed no movement. Alice has no new decision line of Victoria approaching Charlie's. Edward's jaw clenched. Because she's here, he said. Carlyle nodded once. Yes, he said. Emmett and Jasper returned too, both wet, both controlled. Emmett looked irritated but satisfied the humans hadn't died. Jasper looked steady, his face calm, but his eyes showed strain from pushing emotions at range. Jasper looked at Victoria, then at the containment ring. You held her, he said to me, low. Yeah, I replied. Emmett leaned forward, eyebrows raised. So we just keep her, he said. Rosalie appeared shortly after, stepping out of the trees with her usual cold precision. Charlie's house stayed quiet, she said flatly. No one noticed anything. Carlyle nodded. Good, he said. Edward's posture didn't soften. He stared at Victoria with hard eyes. Now, he said tightly. Carlyle stayed calm. Now we decide what to do that doesn't create more risk for Bella, he replied evenly. Rosalie's eyes narrowed. She should be destroyed, she said coldly. Jasper's voice was low. Not here, he said. And not near Forks. Emmett scratched the back of his neck, irritated. She's going to keep trying, he said. I don't love letting her walk away. Carlyle's expression stayed composed. We are not letting her walk away, he said evenly. Victoria thrashed again at the words, furious, but the containment held. Edward turned to Carlyle, eyes sharp. Then what? He demanded, tight. Carlyle looked at me. Kai, he said evenly. How stable is your containment for transport? Stable, I said. I can move her without noise. Edward's eyes narrowed. Where? He asked. Carlyle's voice was calm. Farther than Forks, he said. Somewhere isolated. Somewhere with no human houses. We hold her long enough to force distance and reduce her access to Bella. Edward's jaw clenched. She'll come back, he said again. Carlyle nodded once. Perhaps, he said. But not tonight, and not easily. Rosalie's expression stayed cold. Holding her is still a risk, she said. Carlyle didn't argue. Yes, he said evenly. But allowing her to keep circling Bella is a greater risk. Jasper's gaze stayed steady. We can rotate guard, he said quietly. Keep her restrained. Keep her away. Emmett muttered, I can guard, like he was volunteering just so he could do something. Alice's voice came through the phone one more time, fast and tense. Bella is asleep, she said. Charlie is awake. He's pacing. He checked the locks twice. Edward's face tightened with guilt and worry. Carlyle's voice stayed even. We do not go near the house, he said, firm. Edward looked like he wanted to argue, then he forced himself still. Fine, he said flatly. I crouched near Victoria again and adjusted the chains so the containment became a tighter bundle for transport. I added the field anchor to it so if she forced a break, the entire spell structure would react instantly instead of waiting for me to notice. Victoria hissed and strained. She couldn't move enough to do anything useful. Emmett watched me work, eyes wide with interest. That's neat, he said. Rosalie shot him a cold look. Stop admiring, she said. Emmett shrugged. I can admire and hate her at the same time, he said. Jasper's eyes stayed on Victoria. She's listening, he murmured. Edward leaned closer, voice low and tight. Listen, he said to Victoria. If you come near her again, it won't be you choosing the place. Victoria bared her teeth. Carlyle stepped in, calm. Edward, he said gently. Edward's jaw clenched. He pulled back, controlling himself. We lifted Victoria's restrained form together, moving with controlled speed through the forest. The rain covered our movement. The night stayed quiet. As we moved, Edward stayed close, eyes sharp. Jasper stayed steady. Emmett and Rosalie covered the rear and sides. Carlisle led, calm and practical. Victoria didn't stop struggling completely, but her attempts became smaller. Testing. Waiting. She was still committed. She was also learning what my restraints felt like. I didn't treat it like a victory. I treated it like a temporary control of a problem that would try to become a worse problem the moment we got sloppy. Edward walked beside me, voice low. "Teach me more," he said tightly, without looking at my face. I kept my tone light. "If you keep listening," I replied. Edward's mouth tightened. "I'm listening," he said. Jasper glanced at Edward, then spoke quietly. "You are," he said, and it sounded like approval. Edward didn't respond, but his posture loosened by a fraction. We kept moving through the wet forest, carrying a restrained vampire who had tried twice to reach Bella and once to kill a stranger to distract us, and now couldn't even twist her shoulders enough to slip free. Chapter 10, Holding Ground and Hard Timing. We moved Victoria through the forest like we were carrying a dangerous piece of equipment that couldn't be dropped. The restraint bundle stayed tight under my control. Chains and seals sat layered around her torso and limbs, with the tracking thread still anchored to her presence. Every time she tried to twist, the lock reacted instantly and forced her back into stillness. It wasn't painful in a human way. It was pressure and limitation. It made her angry, and her anger made her keep testing. Edward walked close enough that his shoulder nearly brushed mine every few steps. His eyes never stopped moving. He kept checking the trees, the ground, the direction of Charlie's house even when it was miles away. He looked like he had to remind himself not to run there. Jasper stayed to Edward's other side, calm, contained, watching Edward as much as he watched the forest. Carlisle led, picking routes that avoided anything that looked like a trail. Rosalie and Emmett stayed wider, silent and ready. The rain thinned as the night stretched toward early morning. The air stayed cold. My clothes stayed wet. I didn't care about that part. Victoria did. She hissed once when a colder gust hit her face through the chain gaps. She didn't speak. She didn't plead. She didn't bargain. She just watched with hate and kept looking for any moment that might let her move. Emmett finally muttered, annoyed, "She's like a cat in a sack." Rosalie shot him a look. "Stop talking," she said coldly. Emmett's mouth tightened, but he shut up. Carlisle slowed and lifted a hand slightly, signaling us to stop. We did immediately. The forest here was thicker and quieter. The ground dipped into a small hollow surrounded by heavy trunks and dense brush. No nearby road noise. No human lights. No open space that would carry sound. "This will work," Carlisle said evenly. Edward's head snapped toward him. "Here," he said, tight. "Here for now," Carlisle replied calmly. "We need distance from Charlie's house, and we need a place where we can control sound." Jasper scanned the perimeter, eyes narrowing. "No human scent," he said quietly. Rosalie's gaze stayed sharp. "Good," she said flatly. I lowered the restraint bundle to the ground carefully and unfolded the structure into a containment ring again, wider than before. I anchored it into the soil and the root lines of the trees, giving it stability. If Victoria surged, she wouldn't just fight chains. She'd be fighting the whole structure. Victoria's eyes tracked my hands. Her expression hardened. Edward stood over her, rigid. His hands were clenched. "You won't get to her," he said quietly. Victoria hissed through her teeth, a low, nasty sound. Carlisle stepped in between Edward and the containment ring without touching Edward. He didn't crowd him. He just placed himself there like a calm boundary. Edward, he said gently, step back. Edward's jaw clenched. He didn't move. Jasper's voice was low. Edward, he said again, controlled. Edward's shoulders tightened, then he stepped back one pace, stiff. His face stayed hard. Carlyle looked down at Victoria with a neutral expression. You are being held here, he said evenly. You will not be harmed while you remain restrained. Victoria's lips curled back. Her eyes flashed. Rosalie scoffed under her breath. Like she deserves that, she said coldly. Carlyle didn't react to Rosalie. He stayed calm and focused. We are not doing this to punish you, he said to Victoria. We are doing this to prevent you from harming a human. Victoria stared at him like his words were a joke. Jasper watched Victoria's face and posture, then murmured, she doesn't care what you say. I know, Carlyle replied evenly. But I will still say what is true. Edward's voice was tight. She tried to kill someone in town, he said, like he needed everyone to keep that fact in front of them. Carlyle nodded once. Yes, he said calmly. And we stopped it. Emmett shifted his stance and looked down at Victoria. If she can't do anything, why not just leave her here and go back, he asked, blunt. Rosalie's eyes narrowed. Because she'll get out, she said flatly. I answered before it turned into an argument. She won't, I said calmly. Not unless I let her. But I'm not leaving her unattended, because she'll test until she finds something small. Victoria's eyes flicked to me, and the hate in them sharpened. Edward's gaze snapped to me. Then you stay, he said tightly. I smiled faintly. That's the plan, I replied. Carlyle folded his hands loosely. We need a rotation, he said. Not everyone stays. Not everyone leaves. We keep Bella covered. We keep Charlie calm. We keep this contained. Edward's posture tightened. I'm staying here, he said immediately. Carlyle looked at him for a long moment. No, he said evenly. Edward's eyes flashed. Why? He demanded. Because Bella still needs coverage, Carlyle replied calmly. And because if you stay here too long, you will fixate on her. Edward's jaw clenched. She's the problem, he said, voice tight. She is a problem, Carlyle corrected gently. But you becoming unstable is also a problem. Edward stared at Carlyle with anger in his eyes. He didn't deny it. Jasper's voice was low. He needs to move, he said quietly. If he stays staring at her, it will get worse. Edward's hands clenched again, tendons visible. I'm fine, he said flatly. I glanced at Edward's face, then spoke lightly to cut the edge. You're doing great, I said cheerfully. Your fine is just loud. Edward turned his head sharply toward me. Stop, he said, clipped. I smiled anyway. No, I replied happily. Rosalie's eyes narrowed. He's insufferable, she said coldly. Emmett made a short sound that might have been agreement, then looked away. Carlyle lifted a hand. Enough, he said softly, and the room in the forest quieted again. Carlyle turned slightly, scanning everyone. Jasper, he said. You stay with Kai for the first rotation. Your control and awareness help. Emmett and Rosalie will return toward Charlie's area and maintain distance coverage, rotating with Alice's updates. Edward. Edward's head snapped to Carlyle again. Edward will return to the Cullen house, Carlyle said evenly, and we will address Charlie. Edward's face tightened. I'm not going to Charlie's house, he said. Carlyle nodded once. Not to his house, he said calmly. I will speak with him. You will not. Edward's shoulders tightened. He hates me, he said, tight. Carlyle's expression stayed calm. He is frightened, he replied. And that means he will blame what he can see. Edward looked like he wanted to argue, then he just stared into the trees, jaw clenched. I spoke calmly, not teasing now. If Charlie gets worse, Bella gets stuck, I said. If Bella gets stuck, she gets isolated. That gives Victoria better chances. Edward's head turned slightly, and his eyes narrowed like he hated that it made sense. Carlyle nodded. Exactly, he said. Rosalie's tone stayed cold. So we treat Charlie like he's fragile, she said. Carlyle didn't correct her bluntness. We treat him like a human father, he said evenly. Emmett nodded once. Okay, he said. Jasper looked at Edward, voice low. You can handle sitting in the house, he said, controlled. You handled not rushing the door tonight? Edward's eyes flashed. That's not praise, he said flatly. Jasper's mouth tightened slightly. It's reality, he said. Edward didn't respond. His posture stayed rigid, but he didn't lunge toward Victoria again. Carlyle looked at me. Kai, he said evenly. Can you maintain the containment with only you and Jasper here? Yes, I replied. Carlyle nodded once. Good, he said. If anything shifts, call. Alice will remain on the decision lines. She will alert us if Victoria's attention changes in any way that threatens Bella. Victoria hissed at the mention of Bella again, like she hated hearing the name. Edward's eyes snapped down at her. Don't, he said quietly. Victoria bared her teeth. Carlyle stepped back slightly, then looked at Edward again. Come, he said gently. Edward stayed still for one beat, then turned stiffly and started walking away, fast, controlled, like leaving hurt him. Emmett and Rosalie moved with him, leaving Jasper and me behind in the hollow with the contained vampire. When the others were gone, the forest got quieter again. Jasper stood near me, posture calm but ready. You're sure she can't break that? He said quietly. I nodded. Yes, I replied. Jasper's eyes stayed on the ring. She's persistent, he said. She is, I agreed. Victoria didn't stop watching us. Her eyes flicked between Jasper and me, then toward the direction the others had gone. Her body tensed like she wanted to surge, but the ring pressed her down. Jasper spoke low, mostly to himself. Her focus is sharp, he murmured. It's like a straight line. No hesitation. I kept my tone light because the situation didn't need to be heavy. She's very committed to being annoying, I said cheerfully. Jasper's mouth twitched slightly. That's one way to say it, he replied. I crouched and adjusted one anchor point, tightening the ring's response time. She self-injures to slip, I said calmly. I'm accounting for that. If she dislocates something, the ring will still hold the center. Jasper watched my hands. Edward wants to understand it, he said quietly. Yeah, I replied. I noticed. Jasper's expression stayed controlled. He won't accept feeling helpless, he said. He's not helpless, I said. He's just not used to limits. Jasper's eyes narrowed slightly, then he nodded once. Victoria shifted again, testing. The ring pressed down. Her movement stopped. She hissed quietly, eyes full of hate. I looked at her calmly. You can keep doing that, I said pleasantly. It won't change anything. Victoria's expression tightened. Her jaw moved like she wanted to speak, but she didn't. She kept her silence like it was a weapon. Jasper studied her face. She's listening, he murmured. I know, I replied. Jasper shot me a short look. You say that a lot, he said, dry. I smiled. It's efficient, I replied happily. We held the first rotation like that, Jasper scanning the perimeter and sensing shifts in the air, me maintaining the containment and keeping my awareness on the tracking thread and field anchor. The forest stayed quiet. No unexpected movement. No sudden changes. After a while, Jasper exhaled slowly. I can feel her frustration, he said quietly. Good, I said. Let her sit in it. Jasper nodded once. When the next rotation arrived, it was Carlyle returning first, calm and composed, with Edward behind him. Edward looked like he had been forced to pace in a small space and hated it. Carlyle spoke quietly as he approached. Charlie is still awake, he said evenly. He's anxious. He checked the locks. He did not see anything. Edward's jaw clenched. Bella, he said, tight. Carlyle nodded. Sleeping, he said calmly. Alice confirmed she remained asleep. No decision lines that suggest her leaving the house. Edward's shoulders lowered by a fraction, relief leaking through his posture. Rosalie and Emmett did not return with them, they stayed on the distant coverage, as planned. Carlyle looked at Jasper. You should return and rest, he said gently. Jasper nodded once. He glanced at me. Call if anything shifts, he said quietly. I will, I replied. Jasper left, moving silently into the trees. Edward stayed. He stared at Victoria like he wanted to tear the ring apart just to touch her. His expression was cold and tight. Carlyle spoke calmly. Edward, he said. We do not engage her emotionally. Edward's eyes flicked to Carlyle. I'm not emotional, he said flatly. Carlyle's expression stayed mild. All right, he said. I took a small breath and kept it light. Okay, I said cheerfully. Training time. Edward's head snapped toward me. Now, he said tightly. Yes, I replied. Now. Because she's here, contained, and you're not going to stop staring at her anyway. Carlyle's gaze shifted between us. This must remain controlled, he said evenly. It will, I replied. Edward stepped closer to the containment ring, stopping just at the edge. Victoria's eyes locked on him, hate burning. Edward's face tightened. I spoke calmly. You wanted to understand timing, I said. So we do simple sequences. No big moves. No trying to rip her apart. Just coordination. Edward's voice was clipped. Fine, he said. I looked down at the ring and pointed to a specific anchor. This is a pressure node, I said. If she pushes here, the ring compresses there. Watch the chain tension. Edward's eyes narrowed as he followed my finger. Victoria tested again, slow twisting. The chain line on her left side tightened. Edward noticed immediately, his gaze sharpening. You see it, I said. Edward didn't answer. He watched. I continued. If she tries to shift her center, you don't grab her, I said. You hit the node. Edward's eyes snapped to me. Hit how? He asked, tight. With your strength, I replied calmly. You can crack the soil and disturb the anchor for a moment. That forces the ring to reset. It interrupts her timing. Edward looked down at the soil, then back at the anchor point. His jaw clenched like he didn't like being told to strike dirt instead of flesh. Carlyle's voice stayed calm. It is safer, he said gently. Edward didn't answer. I nodded toward the anchor. Try, I said. Edward hesitated for half a beat, then stepped forward and drove his heel into the ground beside the anchor point with controlled force. The soil cracked. The roots shifted slightly. The anchor line flickered in response. Victoria's movement stuttered. Her attempt to twist died immediately. Edward's eyes narrowed. He looked almost surprised. I smiled faintly. "Good," I said. Edward's voice was tight. "Again," he said. "Okay," I replied. I loosened the ring by a fraction, allowing Victoria just enough freedom to test. She immediately surged, trying to yank her shoulder through a gap. The chain tension spiked. Edward struck the anchor again without hesitation. Victoria froze under the pressure. Edward's jaw clenched, but his posture looked steadier now, less wild. Carlyle watched silently, approval in the way his gaze stayed calm. I kept going, making it a drill. "She wants to slip left," I said. "So you stand here." Edward moved into position instantly. "If she pushes forward, you don't pull back," I said. "You step to cut the angle." Edward adjusted his stance, shoulders squared. Victoria thrashed again, harder. Edward did not lunge at her. He hit the soil anchor, then stepped sideways, blocking the path she wanted. Victoria's eyes widened slightly at the control. Edward's expression stayed cold. "Not this time," he said quietly. Carlyle spoke softly. "Good," he said. Edward didn't acknowledge the praise. I looked at Edward and kept my tone light, because it helped keep him from turning it into a personal war. "See," I said happily. "You can learn." Edward shot me a look. "I already know," he said flatly. I smiled. "Sure," I replied. He didn't soften, but he didn't lose control either. We worked through several more sequences, each one aimed at a specific escape method: shoulder rotation, leg slack, self-injury to create a gap, sudden burst to snap one chain line. Each time, the drill was the same: don't chase her body, chase the system. Hit the anchor, cut the angle, keep her center pinned. Edward absorbed it fast when he stopped fighting the concept. Victoria hated it. Her movements became more violent, less efficient. She began snapping and hissing, thrashing like she wanted to force us to make a mistake. I didn't react. I just kept the ring tight. Carlyle finally lifted a hand. "Enough," he said evenly. "Edward, step back." Edward's posture stayed rigid. "She's still trying," he said, tight. "Yes," Carlyle replied calmly. "And she will continue. But you have learned the timing." Edward's eyes flicked to Carlyle, then back to Victoria. Carlyle's voice stayed gentle. "Bella needs you calm," he said. Edward's jaw clenched. He stepped back one pace, stiff. I nodded toward Victoria and adjusted the containment into a transport-ready configuration again. "Next phase," I said lightly. "We move her farther out. Somewhere we can rotate guard without risking town-level attention." Edward's eyes narrowed. "And if she escapes," he said tightly. "She won't," I replied calmly. Edward's gaze snapped to me. "Don't," he said sharply. I smiled faintly. "I mean it," I replied. Carlyle's expression stayed composed. "Kai's containment has held repeatedly," he said. "And now Edward understands the response points. That reduces risk." Edward didn't argue. He just stared at Victoria with hard eyes. Victoria stared back, hate still burning, but there was something else now too: calculation mixed with frustration. She was learning that the usual methods weren't working. Carlyle looked at Edward. "We will maintain coverage near Charlie's house," he said evenly. "Rosalie and Emmett will rotate with Jasper and Alice's direction. We will keep this away from Bella." Edward's jaw clenched. "Charlie," he said, tight. Carlyle nodded. I will speak with him again today, he said. Not to push. To steady him. To make him less reactive. Edward's eyes narrowed. He won't listen, he said. He will listen to calm, Carlyle replied gently. He may not like us, but he will listen. Edward didn't respond, but his posture shifted like the idea gave him a sliver of control. I lifted the restrained bundle again, keeping it tight and quiet. Victoria thrashed once, then stopped when the seal pressed her down. Carlyle walked beside me, calm. Edward stayed on my other side, eyes sharp. Teach Jasper too, Edward said tightly as we moved. I will, I replied. Edward's jaw clenched. Soon, he said. I smiled faintly. Okay, I replied. We moved through the wet forest again, carrying Victoria deeper into isolation while the rest of the plan ran in parallel. Charlie kept steady, Bella kept safe, the town kept calm. Chapter 11, Hallways, Rumors, and a Second Shadow. By the time the sky started looking like morning again, the night felt like it had never ended. I wasn't tired in the normal sense. My body didn't drag. My eyes didn't blur. But my attention had been tight for hours, and that kind of focus always left a quiet pressure behind my ribs, like I'd been holding something steady and heavy with one hand. We had Victoria contained. Far enough out that no human would wander into it by accident. Guard rotations were set. Carlyle had already moved into his calm planning mode, speaking like a doctor giving instructions that saved lives. Jasper looked steadier now that Edward had something to do besides spiral. Edward still looked like a spring that had been compressed too long. And Bella still had school. That part mattered. Humans noticed patterns. Humans asked questions. Humans leaned close and pushed, even when they told themselves they were being caring. Bella's world was small enough already, and Charlie's fear was making it smaller. The morning at the Cullen house was quiet in the way it always was. No clatter of dishes. No rushed footsteps. No sleepy voices. Esme moved through the kitchen with soft control, preparing food she didn't need to eat, because she liked doing it, and because it helped make the house feel normal when it wasn't. Alice sat on the counter like she belonged there, legs swinging slightly, eyes sharp and restless. Jasper stood near her, hands in his pockets, watching everything without looking like he was watching. Edward was near the window again. I walked in and gave Esme a small smile. "Morning," I said happily. Esme's face softened. "Good morning," she replied gently. "Did you get any rest?" "Enough," I said, which was true in the only way it could be. Alice's eyes snapped to me. "Bella's going to school," she said quickly, like she needed to state it out loud so it would be real. Edward didn't turn from the window. "She shouldn't," he said quietly. Jasper's gaze flicked to Edward's back. "She will," he said evenly. Edward's jaw clenched. Esme set a plate on the table anyway, habit more than need. "Charlie will insist," she said softly. Edward finally turned, his expression tight. "Charlie doesn't know what's out there," he said, controlled but strained. Alice's voice was quick. "Charlie knows something tried to hurt her," she said. "That's why he's acting like this." Edward's eyes flashed. "That's why she shouldn't be in a building full of humans who can't protect her," he said tightly. I sat down in one of the chairs and kept my posture loose. "School is predictable," I said calmly. "That helps." Edward's gaze snapped to me. "Predictable," he repeated like he didn't believe in the word anymore. "Yes," I said. "And right now, predictable keeps Charlie calmer. If Charlie stays calmer, Bella's routine stays less restricted." Edward's jaw clenched again, but he didn't argue. He looked like he wanted to. Alice slid off the counter. Carlisle is talking to Charlie again this morning, she said quickly. Not to fight. Just to keep him from making new rules every hour. Edward's shoulders tightened. I'm not going, he said flatly. Esme's voice was gentle. No one is asking you to, she said. Edward looked like he didn't like the softness either. He wanted simple outcomes. He didn't get those. Jasper's voice stayed low. We'll keep it normal at school, he said. We'll keep you close without hovering. Edward's eyes narrowed. I don't hover, he said. I smiled faintly. Sure, I said. Edward shot me a look. Alice's lips twitched like she wanted to laugh and didn't. Kai, she said quickly, you're coming too. I know, I replied. Jasper's gaze stayed steady. You're staying near Bella, he said quietly. Yes, I replied. Edward's jaw tightened, but he didn't object this time. That was progress, even if he wouldn't admit it. A little later, Carlisle returned, calm as ever, coat still dry like rain didn't apply to him. He stepped into the living room and looked at Edward first. Charlie is firm, Carlisle said evenly. But he is listening. Edward's face stayed hard. What did he say? He asked tightly. Carlisle's tone remained gentle. He wants Bella to attend school and come straight home, he said. He wants her phone on at all times. He wants her to answer if he calls. He wants her to spend evenings at home. Edward's jaw clenched. And me, he said, voice low. Carlisle held Edward's gaze calmly. Public only, he said. School. Parking lot. Daylight. No private visits. No late nights. Edward went still. His hands curled slowly into fists. Alice's eyes widened. Charlie is really committing, she said quickly. Esme's expression tightened with worry for Edward. Jasper's posture stayed controlled, but his eyes sharpened on Edward's face. Edward's voice was flat. He can't decide that, he said. Carlisle's voice stayed calm. He can, he replied evenly. She is his daughter. He is frightened. Edward looked like he wanted to break something. I spoke lightly, not to dismiss Edward, but to redirect him. Public only is workable, I said cheerfully. It's annoying, but it's workable. Edward's head snapped toward me. It's not your life, he said tightly. No, I replied calmly. It's Bella's. And Charlie's. And yours. That's why I'm telling you what keeps it from getting worse. Edward stared at me with hard eyes. Carlisle spoke gently. Edward, he said. If you push, Charlie will tighten the restrictions. Bella will be isolated. That increases risk. Edward's jaw clenched. His eyes flicked away. He forced himself to nod once, stiff. Alice exhaled. Okay, she said quickly. Then we make school the safest place in Forks. Jasper's mouth tightened slightly. We keep it subtle, he said. Emmett wandered in from the hallway, already dressed, expression mildly annoyed. So Bella's going to school, he said. And Edward is going to pretend he's calm. Edward glared at him. Emmett held up his hands. I'm not starting, he said. Rosalie appeared behind him, expression cold. We're wasting time, she said flatly. Carlisle didn't react to her tone. Then we move, he said evenly. The drive to Forks High felt like it always did, wet roads, grey sky, the smell of rain on pavement. Edward drove. Bella wasn't in the car with us, she'd left with Charlie, because Charlie was insisting on control. Edward's hands were tight on the wheel. Alice sat in the passenger seat, bright and restless. Jasper sat behind her, calm. I sat behind Edward, relaxed. Alice kept turning slightly to look at Jasper, then forward again. She's nervous, Alice said quickly, as if she could see Bella's heartbeat from miles away. Jasper's voice was low. She would be, he said evenly. Edward didn't speak. His jaw kept tightening and relaxing. I leaned back. Try not to scare her, I said lightly. Edward's head turned slightly, eyes sharp. I'm not scaring her, he said flatly. Jasper murmured, he is, but quiet enough that Edward pretended not to hear it. When we arrived, Charlie's cruiser was already in the parking lot. He stood near it, posture tense, watching the school entrance like it was a threat. Bella stood beside him with her backpack on, shoulders slightly hunched, face pale in the grey light. Edward stopped the car and got out immediately. His movement was controlled, but it was fast enough to be noticeable. Charlie's gaze snapped to him, hard. Bella's eyes flicked to Edward, relief and worry mixing in her face. Bella, Edward said quietly, taking one step closer. Charlie's voice cut in. Public, he said flatly, eyes on Edward. Edward went still. Bella's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Dad, she said quietly. Charlie didn't soften. Inside, he said to Bella. Now. Bella's jaw tightened. She looked annoyed and trapped at the same time. I'm going, she said, then she turned and walked toward the entrance. Edward moved to follow. Charlie's gaze stayed hard. I'm watching, he said, voice rough. Edward didn't look at Charlie. He looked at Bella's back. I know, he said quietly. I walked up beside Alice and Jasper, keeping my tone cheerful. Morning, I said toward Charlie. Charlie's gaze flicked to me, suspicious. You again, he said. I smiled politely. Yeah, I replied. I like school spirit. Charlie didn't smile. Alice gave Charlie a bright grin that was too bright for him. Hi, Charlie, she said happily. Charlie blinked at her, confused. Hi, he said, flat. Jasper nodded once, controlled. Chief, he said quietly. Charlie's gaze narrowed at Jasper, then shifted away like he didn't want to deal with more Cullen-related weirdness. Bella walked ahead, faster now, like she wanted to escape the conversation. Edward followed at a careful distance. Alice and Jasper moved behind, and I stayed near the back, scanning. Inside the hallway, the usual sound hit us, lockers, voices, wet shoes on tile. Bella immediately drew attention. Jessica approached first, eyes wide, voice high. Bella, she said, too loud. Oh my God! Are you okay? Your dad was outside like. Bella's face tightened. I'm fine, she said quickly. Mike appeared on Jessica's shoulder like he'd been waiting. His eyes went straight to Edward. This is because of him, he said, voice tight. Bella's shoulders tensed. Mike, she said, warning. Jessica's gaze flicked to me, curiosity sharpening. And who are you? She asked, like she couldn't help it. Kai, I said happily. Jessica blinked. Are you new? She asked. New enough, I replied. Mike didn't even look at me at first. He kept staring at Edward. Charlie's serious, he said, voice hard. He's right. Edward's face went cold. You don't know anything, he said flatly. Mike's jaw clenched. I know she keeps getting hurt, he said, voice rising slightly. Bella flinched. Angela stepped in, calm and gentle. Mike, she said softly, stop. Mike didn't stop. Bella, he said, turning to her, voice softer but still intense, you don't have to do this. Bella's eyes flashed. I do, she said tightly, then she looked away like she didn't want her voice to shake. I stepped forward slightly, still casual. Okay, I said, cheerful but firm. You're not helping. Let her walk to class. Mike's eyes narrowed at me. Who are you to tell me that? He demanded. I smiled. Someone who's watching her face, I replied calmly. Jessica's mouth opened again, but Angela touched her arm. Come on, Angela said gently. We're going to be late. Bella started walking. Angela stayed with her, steady and quiet. Edward followed, forcing himself not to put a hand on Bella's shoulder in the hallway where Charlie might somehow appear again. Alice walked behind them, bright and composed. Jasper stayed near Alice, calm and scanning. I walked beside Jasper. Jasper's voice was low. Crowd attention is higher today, he murmured. I noticed, I replied. It's mostly curiosity, Jasper said. And jealousy. And fear. I glanced toward Bella's shoulders. She feels it, I said. Jasper nodded once. Yes. In biology, Bella sat with Angela today instead of being alone with Edward the whole time. It wasn't because Edward wanted it. It was because Bella needed a small piece of normal, and Angela was safe. Edward sat one seat back, posture stiff, eyes focused on Bella's breathing more than the lesson. Mr. Banner started talking about cell division like nothing in the world mattered but mitochondria. Bella wrote notes, but her pen paused too often. Halfway through class, a knock at the door made Bella jump. Edward's head snapped up instantly. Mr. Banner opened the door. A staff member leaned in and murmured something. Mr. Banner nodded, then looked at the class. Fire drill, he said. The room reacted with the usual groans and shuffling, but Bella's posture tightened immediately. She stood slowly, eyes flicking toward Edward. Edward was already moving to her side. Don't, Bella whispered, tight. Edward froze for half a beat, then forced himself to stay half a step back. We filed into the hallway. The school's alarm started blaring, sharp and loud. Students poured into the hallways, pushing, laughing, complaining. The noise and movement turned everything messy. Jasper's attention sharpened instantly. He moved closer to Alice. Alice's eyes flicked rapidly across faces and exit lines, trying to catch any choice that mattered. Bella moved with Angela, but the crowd shifted and separated them. Someone bumped Bella's shoulder hard enough that she stumbled a step. Edward's eyes went hard. He moved closer. Bella looked back, annoyed and scared. Edward, she said sharply. Edward's jaw clenched. Stay in front of me, he said quietly. Bella's lips pressed together, irritated. I slid to Bella's other side without crowding her. Just walk, I said calmly. Bella's eyes flicked to me, then she nodded once and kept moving. Outside, the rain had softened to mist. Students gathered in clusters on the wet field, shivering and laughing. Bella tried to stand apart from the crowd, but Jessica found her anyway. Bella, Jessica said, voice bright. This is crazy. Everyone's talking. Did your dad seriously drive you to school like you're in trouble? Bella's cheeks flushed. It's nothing, she said quickly. Mike stepped up behind Jessica again. He's not wrong, Mike muttered. Bella's eyes flashed. Stop, she said, more forceful now. People nearby turned their heads. Edward's posture tightened. His face went cold. Jasper's gaze flicked toward the far edge of the field. His expression changed by a fraction. Alice stiffened too, head tilting. I don't like that, she whispered quickly. I followed Jasper's gaze. At the tree line beyond the field, a figure stood too still. Not a student. Not a teacher. Too tall. Too composed. Too calm. He wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't hiding. He looked like he didn't care if anyone saw him because he knew humans wouldn't understand what they were seeing. Laurent. I recognized him instantly from Canon, and the fact that he was here made my focus sharpen. He wasn't supposed to be in a schoolyard. He was supposed to be somewhere else, watching from a distance, uncertain, curious, and dangerous when hunger hit. He looked toward Bella like her presence was a scent he could taste from here. Edward's body went rigid. His eyes narrowed hard. Jasper's posture tightened, controlled but ready. Alice's face tightened, frustration flickering. Bella noticed the shift in the air, the way Edward's expression changed. "What?" she asked quietly, tension rising. Edward's voice was low. "Nothing," he said, but it wasn't convincing. Bella's eyes narrowed. "Edward," she said, warning. I kept my tone light to keep Bella from panicking. "Just stay close," I said calmly. Bella's eyes flicked to the tree line and then back. She didn't see what we saw. To her, it was just trees and grey. The staff members shouted for students to stay grouped. Teachers tried to herd people. Laurent moved. Not fast. Not vampire blur fast. He walked, calm and deliberate, toward the side of the school building where the crowd thinned. He wasn't going to attack in front of everyone. He was too careful for that. But he was going to get closer, and once he had Bella's scent clean, he'd make decisions. I leaned closer to Jasper, voice low. "That's Laurent," I murmured. Jasper's eyes flicked to me, sharp. "You know him," he said quietly. "I know of him," I replied. Edward's jaw clenched like he'd heard anyway. He didn't take his eyes off the tree line. Alice's voice was quick, tense. "I didn't see him coming here," she whispered. "Crowds," Jasper murmured. "Too many choices." Edward's voice was tight. "We move Bella inside," he said. Bella turned sharply. "What's happening?" she demanded, louder now, frustration mixing with fear. Edward's eyes softened for half a second, then hardened again. "Please," he said quietly. "Just trust me." Bella's mouth tightened. She hated being asked to trust without being told. But the tone in Edward's voice hit something in her, and she nodded once, stiff. We started moving toward the building with the rest of the crowd, using the teacher flow as cover. Edward stayed close without touching. Alice stayed near Bella's other side, smiling too brightly as if this was just normal drill movement. Jasper and I flanked. As soon as we were inside, Laurent's presence felt closer, like a cold line in the air. He appeared near a side hallway where fewer students passed. His posture was calm. His expression was polite. "Edward," Laurent said, voice smooth and controlled. Edward's face went icy. "Laurent," he replied flatly. Bella stopped walking. Her eyes widened slightly. "Who is that?" she asked quietly. Edward's voice was low. "Keep moving," he said. Bella hesitated, then moved one step, then stopped again when Laurent's gaze flicked to her. Laurent smiled faintly. "And this is her," he said softly, like he was confirming something. Edward stepped subtly in front of Bella, blocking the line of sight. Jasper's posture tightened. Alice's eyes widened, then narrowed. I kept my expression cheerful, because the situation didn't need to look like a fight in a school hallway full of humans. "Hey," I said casually, like I was addressing a visitor. "You lost." Laurent's gaze moved to me, calm curiosity. "You are not one of them," he said politely. "No," I replied. "I'm a school enthusiast." Laurent's faint smile didn't change. You have a strange scent, he said. Edward's jaw clenched. Jasper's eyes sharpened. Alice's posture tightened. Bella looked between us, confused and tense. Edward, she said quietly. Edward's voice was tight. Bella, walk, he said. Bella's hands clenched around her backpack straps. She looked angry now, because her fear always turned into irritation when she felt controlled. But she did walk, one step at a time, with Alice guiding her gently forward. Laurent shifted slightly, body poised. He wasn't attacking yet. He was measuring. Then he made the decision. He moved fast, trying to slip around Edward and Jasper toward Bella's scent. Edward lunged. Jasper moved too. And I ended it. Chain magic snapped into place around Laurent's ankles and wrists, formed instantly, not thrown. He hit the floor hard enough to crack tile. Students nearby shrieked and backed away, thinking someone had slipped or been tackled. A teacher shouted, "Hey," and started moving toward us. Laurent snarled, shocked more than hurt. His eyes widened slightly when the anti-magic layer bit into him and slowed his movement. Edward slammed his foot down near Laurent's shoulder, pinning him in place without visibly crushing him. Jasper crouched, posture controlled, eyes sharp. Alice moved Bella down the hallway quickly, keeping her face bright and normal. "Come on," she said to Bella happily, like they were just avoiding a scuffle. Bella kept looking back, eyes wide, breathing shallow. "Edward," she said, voice tight. "Keep walking," Edward said, low. The teacher got closer, eyes wide. "What is going on?" he demanded. I lifted my hands slightly, smiling like this was just stupid teenager behavior. "He slipped," I said cheerfully. "And then he tried to swing. We grabbed him." The teacher's eyes snapped to Laurent on the floor, then to Edward's cold face, then to Jasper's calm stare. "You," he said sharply to Laurent. "Get up." Laurent didn't move fast enough because my chain lock was still biting into his ability to react. I loosened it slightly, just enough that he could move like a normal person. Laurent pushed up onto his hands, eyes cold. Edward's foot lifted off him slowly. Laurent stood, adjusting his coat like nothing happened, face composed again. He looked like an adult who didn't belong here, and that alone made the teacher's suspicion sharpen. "Office," the teacher said sharply. Laurent's gaze flicked to Bella's direction, then to Edward. "We will speak again," he said softly. Edward's face stayed cold. "No," he said flatly. Laurent's eyes flicked to me again. "Interesting," he murmured. I smiled. "Thanks," I replied happily. Laurent turned and walked with the teacher toward the office, posture controlled. To human eyes, it looked like an adult got into a hallway scuffle and was being escorted. To vampire eyes, it was a warning, he'd been caught and restrained by something he didn't understand. Edward's shoulders were tight. Jasper's face stayed controlled, but his gaze was sharp and alert. Bella reappeared at the end of the hallway, having clearly refused to keep walking forever. Alice stood beside her, looking annoyed. "Bella," Alice said quickly, "stop." Bella ignored her and looked straight at Edward. "What was that?" she demanded, voice tight. Edward's jaw clenched. He looked like he hated that she was asking in a crowded hallway. "Not here," he said quietly. Bella's eyes flashed with anger and fear. "You always say that," she said sharply. I stepped closer, still calm. "He's dangerous," I said simply. Bella's eyes snapped to me. "Dangerous like James?" she asked, voice tight. Edward went still. Alice's face tightened. Jasper's posture stayed controlled. I kept my tone steady. "Yes," I said. "Like that." Bella's face went pale. Her hands tightened on her straps. "And you just did that," she said, looking between me and Edward. Edward's voice was low. "Bella," he said gently, trying to soften it, "please." Bella's breathing sped up. She looked like she wanted to bolt and also like she wanted to slap someone for not telling her everything. Jasper stepped in, voice low and controlled. "We're handling it," he said evenly. Bella's eyes flashed. "I don't want to be handled," she said tightly. Alice's voice was quick, trying to pull her back into motion. "Okay," she said brightly, forced. "We're going to go to class now." "Normal day." Bella stared at Alice like she wanted to argue, then she swallowed hard. "Fine," she said tightly, and she walked, stiff. Edward followed at a careful distance again, face tight. Jasper stayed near. I trailed behind, still watching. The rest of the day didn't become a full disaster, but it stayed tense. Jessica tried to ask Bella questions again at lunch, and Bella shut her down quicker than usual. Mike glared at Edward constantly. Teachers looked irritated after the hallway incident, and Edward had to keep his face blank through it. Alice stayed close to Bella, bright and busy, trying to distract her with small talk that didn't land because Bella's mind kept snapping back to dangerous like James. Jasper kept scanning the crowd. His control stayed steady, but I could feel him dampening spikes of fear that drifted from students who had seen the adult fall and get escorted away. After last period, the parking lot was wet and crowded. Charlie's cruiser was there again, parked in a way that made it obvious he'd been waiting. Bella spotted it and her shoulders tensed immediately. Edward's face tightened. "He's here," he said quietly. Bella's voice was tight. "Of course he is," she replied. Charlie got out of his cruiser, eyes sharp, scanning Bella's face and then scanning Edward like Edward was the problem standing too close. "Bella," Charlie said, voice rough. "In the car." Bella's cheeks flushed. "Dad," she said, embarrassed. Charlie's gaze flicked to the school building. "I got a call," he said, tight. "About an incident." Bella went still. "What incident?" she asked, voice tight. Charlie's eyes narrowed. "Don't," he said. "Don't pretend you don't know." Bella's jaw clenched. She looked like she wanted to scream. Edward's posture tightened, but he didn't move closer. Charlie's gaze snapped to Edward. "You were involved," he said. Edward's voice was controlled. "There was a man who shouldn't have been in the hallway," he said calmly. Charlie's eyes narrowed harder. "A man," he repeated. "At school." Bella's voice shook slightly. "Dad, it wasn't." Charlie cut her off. "Home," he said firmly. Bella's shoulders slumped slightly, not in defeat, but in exhaustion. She climbed into the cruiser. Charlie looked at Edward again. "Public," he said flatly, like he needed to remind Edward that he was in control. Edward's jaw clenched. "I know," he said quietly. Charlie's gaze flicked to me, suspicious. "And you," he said. "You were there too." I smiled politely. "Yeah," I replied. "It was messy." Charlie's expression didn't soften. "Stay away," he said bluntly. I nodded once. "I hear you," I said calmly. Charlie got into the cruiser and drove away with Bella, rain spraying behind the tires. Edward stood still, posture rigid, eyes fixed on the road where the cruiser vanished. Alice exhaled sharply. "That was awful," she said quickly. Jasper's voice was low. "Charlie is escalating," he said evenly. Edward's jaw clenched. "Because he thinks he's protecting her," he said tightly. I kept my voice steady. "He is," I said. "In his way." Edward's eyes snapped to me, anger flashing. And that man, he said, voice tight. Laron. Jasper's gaze sharpened. He'll report, Jasper said quietly. Edward's face went cold again. To Victoria, he said. I nodded. Yes, I replied. Alice's face tightened. But she's contained, she said quickly. For now, Jasper replied evenly. Edward's hands clenched. We need to move faster, he said. I glanced toward the forest line beyond the school. We already are, I said calmly. Now we know Laron is bold enough to come to school. That changes how we guard. Edward's posture stayed tight. You restrained him, he said, clipped. Yeah, I replied. Edward's eyes narrowed. You let him walk, he said, voice tight. I let him get escorted by a teacher, I corrected calmly. If I ripped him apart in a hallway, Charlie would lock Bella in a room and never let her out. Edward's jaw clenched. He hated the logic, but he didn't deny it. Jasper's voice stayed low. We need Carlisle, he said. Alice nodded quickly. We need to tell him about Laron, she said. I started walking toward Edward's car. We will, I said. And we adjust coverage tonight. Edward followed, stiff, eyes still on the road where Charlie had gone. Alice and Jasper got in too, quiet now. As we drove back toward the Cullen house, the rain stayed steady, the town looked normal, and the day had moved forward in a way that made it clear this wasn't only about Victoria anymore. Chapter 12, Lines on Maps in Quiet Hands. We drove back to the Cullen house with the kind of silence that didn't feel peaceful. Edward's hands stayed tight on the wheel. Alice sat rigid in the passenger seat, eyes forward, jaw set like she was annoyed at the entire concept of humans and school rules. Jasper sat behind her, posture calm, gaze scanning out the window even though there wasn't anything to see except wet trees and grey road. I sat behind Edward, relaxed on purpose, because if I let myself mirror Edward's tension it would turn into a closed room with no air. I didn't take most situations seriously. That was true. But when Bella's life was being squeezed by fear and control and predators, I didn't treat it like a joke either. I just stayed steady. Edward pulled into the driveway and cut the engine. Nobody moved for a second. She looked scared, Edward said quietly, voice tight. I nodded. Yeah, I replied calmly. And mad. Edward's jaw clenched. She shouldn't have to be, he said, clipped. Alice turned halfway in her seat. She's always mad when she's scared, Alice said quickly. She does that thing where she argues because she can't stand feeling weak. Edward didn't deny it. He stared through the windshield at the house. Jasper spoke low. Laron will report, he said evenly. If he's aligned with Victoria, he'll tell her what happened. Alice's fingers tightened on her knee. Victoria is contained, she said, fast. Jasper didn't look at her. Contained isn't gone, he replied calmly. Edward finally opened the door and stepped out. His movement was controlled, but sharp. I followed at a normal pace, then Alice and Jasper. Inside, Esme was already waiting in the living room, worry written on her face in a way she couldn't hide. Carlisle was there too, standing near the back of the room, posture calm, expression attentive. Emmett sat on the couch with his hands clasped loosely. Rosalie stood near the stairs with her arms crossed, eyes cold. It looked like a meeting, which meant it probably was. Carlisle's gaze went straight to Edward. You're back earlier than I expected, he said evenly. Edward's voice was tight. He came to the school, he said. Esme's hand lifted toward her mouth briefly, then lowered. Who? She asked softly, though her face already said she knew. Laron, Edward replied flatly. The room tightened. Carlyle's expression didn't change much, but his eyes sharpened. At the school, he repeated. Yes, Jasper said quietly. During a fire drill. Alice's voice came fast. I didn't see it, she said, irritated. Too many choices. Too many people. Rosalie's mouth tightened. So we're back to surprises, she said coldly. Emmett muttered, great, with a humorless edge. I stepped forward and kept my tone light but focused. He tried to slip closer to Bella, I said calmly. We restrained him. A teacher escorted him away. No human deaths. No public vampire fight. Carlyle's gaze moved to me. You restrained him, he said evenly. Yes, I replied. Chain and seal, minimal, then released enough for him to move like a normal person. Edward's head snapped toward me. You released him, he said tightly, like he still hated it. I looked at Edward calmly. He walked into the office with a teacher, I said. If I ripped him apart in a hallway, Charlie would lock Bella inside her house until she graduated. Edward's jaw clenched. He looked away. Carlyle nodded once. That is the correct consideration, he said gently. Rosalie's eyes narrowed. So now we have Laurent and Victoria, she said coldly. And Bella is being escorted by her father like she's a prisoner. Esme's voice stayed soft. Charlie is frightened, she said. Rosalie's expression stayed hard. That doesn't help Bella, she replied flatly. Carlyle didn't argue with Rosalie's tone. He simply looked at all of us. Then we adjust, he said evenly. We will not allow additional vampires to approach Bella in public. Edward's voice was low. Laurent smelled her, he said tightly. He looked at her like she was. Carlyle lifted a hand slightly. Edward, he said gently. Edward stopped, jaw clenched, eyes sharp with disgust. I kept my posture loose. We need perimeter detection, I said. Carlyle's gaze stayed on me. Explain, he said calmly. A field around the school and Charlie's property, I said. Not something humans see. Not something that makes noise. Just a line in the ground that tells us when a vampire crosses it. Alice's eyes widened. You can do that, she said quickly, interest cutting through her irritation. Yes, I replied. I already demonstrated field anchors at the house. I can place them wider and link them so they report to me. If I keep it quiet, you won't feel it unless you're paying attention. Jasper's eyes narrowed slightly, thoughtful. Can you make it specific? He asked quietly. So it reacts to vampires and not just anything moving. I can tune it to pressure, speed, and presence signature, I said. It won't identify a name. But it will flag not human movement and not Cullen movement. Edward's gaze snapped to me. Not Cullen, he repeated. I nodded. I can tag you all as permitted, I said. So you don't trigger it constantly. Emmett raised his eyebrows. So it won't yell at us for walking, he said. It won't yell, I replied cheerfully. It'll just exist. Rosalie's eyes stayed narrow. And you can do this at school without anyone noticing, she said coldly. Yes, I replied. Carlyle nodded once. Then we do it, he said evenly. Tonight. Edward's face tightened. Tonight we also catch Laurent, he said, voice hard. Carlyle's expression stayed calm. Possibly, he said. But we do not act recklessly. Kai's suggestion gives us early warning and reduces surprise. Alice leaned forward. I want it at the school first, she said quickly. That's where people are watching and where Bella is most exposed. Jasper's voice was low. Charlie's property too, he said evenly. Because Victoria's instinct was to approach there. Carlyle nodded. Both, he said. Edward's jaw clenched. And Bella, he said, like it was the only word that mattered. Esme moved closer to Edward, gentle but firm in presence. Bella is home now, she said softly. Charlie is with her. We will not go to the house and trigger him. Edward's face tightened. I know, he said, but his tone said he hated knowing. I glanced at Carlyle. I can lay the school field after dark, I said. No students. No staff. Less chance of being seen. Carlyle nodded. Do that, he said evenly. And Charlie's property at dawn, when the town is still asleep. Edward took one step forward, voice tight. I'm going, he said. Carlyle held Edward's gaze. To the school, he said, calm. Yes. To Charlie's property, you will stay distant. Edward's jaw clenched. Fine, he said flatly. Rosalie made a short sound of annoyance. This is turning into a schedule, she muttered. Emmett shrugged. Schedules win, he said, like that was obvious. Rosalie shot him a look. Carlyle's gaze moved to Edward again. There is one more issue, he said evenly. The school incident will be reported to Charlie. He is already reactive. Edward's eyes went hard. He will blame me, he said. Carlyle nodded slightly. He may, he said calmly. I will speak with him. Not to argue. To reassure. Edward's hands clenched. You can't reassure him, he said tightly. Carlyle didn't raise his voice. I can reduce escalation, he replied evenly. Alice's voice was quick. Charlie's control is making Bella more stubborn, she said. That's going to backfire. Jasper nodded once. Yes, he said quietly. I stayed relaxed, but my attention sharpened. Then our job is to keep her safe while she's stubborn, I said. Edward's gaze flicked to me, then away. Carlyle exhaled softly. All right, he said. Kai, set the school field tonight. Edward and Jasper accompany you. Alice remains here and monitors. Emmett and Rosalie maintain the perimeter schedule. Rosalie's expression stayed cold. And what do I do if Laurent comes near? She asked flatly. Carlyle's tone stayed even. Alert us, he said. Do not engage in a way humans will notice. Rosalie looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. She just looked irritated. Emmett nodded once. Got it, he said. Edward's voice was tight. I want drills, he said, looking at me. I blinked once. Drills, I repeated. Public space restraint, Edward said, clipped. The hallway happened fast. I want to know what you're doing before you do it. Jasper's gaze sharpened, agreeing. That would reduce mistakes, he said quietly. Carlyle nodded. Yes, he said evenly. We will practice controlled responses. Alice huffed. Practice is good, she said quickly. Less chaos. I smiled faintly. Okay, I said. We'll do it after the field is set. In the backyard. Quiet. No smashing trees. Emmett grinned. Ah, he said. Rosalie glared at him. Edward's jaw clenched. No jokes, he said tightly. I lifted both hands slightly. Not joking, I said calmly. We'll do it right. That night, the school looked like an empty shell. The parking lot was wet and shiny under the streetlights. The building itself was dark, with only a few small lights on for security. The air smelled like rain and damp grass. Forks felt even smaller when nobody was outside. Edward parked on the far edge of the lot. Jasper stepped out first, posture calm, scanning wide. Edward moved stiffly, focused. I stepped out last, hands in my pockets, smiling lightly because the silence of an empty school always felt strange. This is where humans spend most of their time, I said cheerfully. It's depressing. Edward's head turned slightly. Focus, he said tightly. I am, I replied, still calm. We walked along the side of the building, staying out of direct street light when possible. Jasper moved like a quiet guard, eyes tracking everything. I stopped near the grass edge and crouched, palm hovering over the wet ground. Okay, I said quietly. This is the outer boundary for the school. I'm setting it wider than the building so we catch approaches before they reach the doors. Edward leaned slightly closer, eyes narrowed. How wide? He asked. Parking lot edge to tree line, I said. Enough to cover entrances. Jasper's voice was low. Keep it stable, he said. It will be, I replied. I drew mana up through my core and into my hand, choosing the grimoire set that handled territory anchors and presence recognition. I wasn't going to make visible lines. I wasn't going to make symbols. I simply pressed intent into the soil and let the field spread like a net. I felt it extend outward in a controlled circle, hooking into the ground, the roots, the shallow water in the soil. Then I tagged the Cullens. Edward first, because he was right beside me. Jasper next. Then the broader family signature, the way their presence felt when I'd been around them long enough to tune it. Edward watched my hand like he expected sparks. There weren't any. Jasper's eyes narrowed slightly. It's there, he murmured, as if he could feel the pressure change. Yes, I said. Edward's jaw tightened. How will you know? He asked. I stood and dusted wet dirt off my fingertips. In my head, I said. It'll ping when something crosses with the wrong signature. If I link it to Jasper, he'll feel a pattern shift. Jasper nodded once. I can work with that, he said. Edward's gaze stayed hard. And if Laurent crosses? He asked. Then I know before he reaches the building, I said. And you know too, because I'll tell you. Edward didn't look satisfied, but his posture eased slightly. Early warning mattered to him. We moved around the building as I laid smaller anchor points, creating layers. Outer ring, then a tighter ring closer to the doors, then a few trip points near hallway windows where a vampire might try to peek or listen. When I finished, I exhaled quietly. Done, I said. Alice's voice came through Edward's phone, fast. I still can't see Laurent clearly, she said. But I can see a decision line where Edward chooses to leave the house if there's a threat. That means the threat might happen soon. Edward's jaw clenched. Soon, he repeated. Jasper's voice stayed calm. We're prepared, he said. I smiled lightly. Prepared is better than surprised, I said. Edward shot me a look, then forced himself to look away. We drove back to the Cullen house and went straight to the backyard for drills. The rain was lighter now, more mist than downpour. The yard was open enough that we could move without slamming into walls. Carlyle watched from the porch, calm and supervising. Alice hovered near him, restless. Emmett leaned against the railing, clearly interested. Rosalie stood nearby, arms crossed, looking like she was only here because she'd been told. I stood in the center of the yard and looked at Edward and Jasper. Public space restraint, I said. We're practicing movement that looks human if anyone glimpses it. Edward's eyes narrowed. I don't look human, he said flatly. I smiled faintly. You can look less like you're about to murder someone, I replied cheerfully. Emmett snorted. Alice made a quick sound of amusement. Edward's eyes flashed, then he forced himself still. Jasper's voice was low. He can, he said evenly. When he tries. Edward didn't answer. I lifted my hands, palms open. We start with the hallway scenario, I said. Predator approaches Bella. You cannot explode into speed in front of humans. So the first move is to block line of sight. Then restrain in a way that looks like a normal scuffle. Edward's jaw clenched. I did block, he said tightly. You did, I agreed. And you wanted to do more. Edward didn't deny it. I pointed to Jasper. Jasper, you're crowd control, I said. You dampen fear and redirect attention. Not mind control like a puppet. Just enough to keep screams down. Jasper nodded once. I can do that, he said. I pointed to Edward. Edward, you're intercept, I said. But you intercept with your body position first, not your hands. Edward's eyes narrowed. That's slower, he said. It's safer, I replied calmly. If you go hands first, you create a scene. Teachers and students remember scenes. Edward's jaw tightened. Fine, he said flatly. Carlyle's voice came gently from the porch. Edward, he said. This is important. Edward nodded once, stiff. I raised one hand and cast a short chain line into the air as a reference. This is what I do, I said. It locks ankles or wrists for one beat. That beat is your entry. Edward watched, eyes tight. Run it, I said. Jasper stepped forward and took the role of predator because he was the most controlled. Edward stood between Jasper and an imaginary Bella. I stood at the side as support. Jasper moved in a quick, smooth lunge, not full vampire speed, but enough to simulate intent. Edward shifted his body to block, shoulders squared, feet planted, taking Jasper's path away. Good, I said. Edward's hands stayed down. Jasper tried to angle. Edward stepped sideways, still blocking. Now, I said. I snapped a chain line at Jasper's ankle, light, just enough to simulate the stutter. Edward moved in and caught Jasper's forearm in a grip that looked like a normal restraint, twisting him gently into a wall position rather than slamming him. Better, I said. Edward's jaw clenched. Again, he said tightly. We did it again. And again. Each time, Edward got less sharp in his movements, not weaker, but more controlled. Jasper's role shifted to simulate different angles. I adjusted chain timing. Alice watched with restless focus. Rosalie scoffed once. This is ridiculous, she said coldly. Carlyle's gaze flicked to her. It is necessary, he said evenly. Rosalie looked away, irritated. Emmett leaned forward. He's actually doing it, he said, impressed. Edward glared at Emmett without heat, then kept moving. After several runs, I stepped closer to Edward and lowered my voice. You're learning, I said calmly. Edward's eyes narrowed. I don't need encouragement, he said flatly. I smiled faintly. Then stop improving, I replied cheerfully. Edward's jaw clenched. He didn't respond, but his next run was even cleaner. Jasper spoke quietly after one sequence. Your movements are calmer, he said to Edward. Edward's mouth tightened. Because I'm thinking, he replied. That's the point, I said. Carlyle nodded once, satisfied. Enough for now, he said evenly. We will repeat tomorrow. Edward looked like he wanted to keep going until his anger burned out. Then Alice stiffened. Her head tilted. Her eyes unfocused for half a second. Her fingers tightened on the porch railing. Jasper's posture changed immediately. Alice, he said quietly. Alice inhaled sharply. He's moving, she said fast. Edward's face went hard instantly. Laurent, he said, tight. Alice nodded quickly. Yes, she said. He's outside town. He's trying to approach from the forest line. He's not going to the school. He's going toward the area near Charlie's Road, but he's staying far enough back to avoid the house. Edward's hands clenched. He's looking for Bella's scent trail, he said. I think so, Alice replied quickly. He's cautious. But he's committed to getting close enough to decide. Carlyle stepped off the porch, calm and immediate. We intercept, he said evenly. Quietly. Before he reaches any road. Rosalie's eyes narrowed. Finally, she said coldly. Emmett grinned once, then sobered. I shifted my weight and felt my focus lock into place. I'll capture, I said calmly. Edward's head snapped to me. No, he said tightly. You're coming, I said, cutting him off without raising my voice. But you're not leading. Edward's eyes flashed. Carlyle's tone stayed gentle. Edward, he said. Follow. Edward's jaw clenched hard, but he nodded once, stiff. We moved into the forest at speed, but controlled. The rain helped. The darkness helped. The ground was soft enough that sound didn't carry far. As we ran, I kept the school field in the back of my awareness, listening for any trigger. Nothing yet. Good. Laurent wasn't stupid enough to cross there again. We reached the deeper woods where the air felt colder. The tracking field I'd set around Charlie's area hadn't been laid yet. It was still too early and too risky with Charlie awake, but Alice's vision line gave us direction, and my earlier anchors around the Cullen property still gave me awareness of anything approaching our known zones. Jasper slowed first, eyes narrowing. He's close, he murmured. Edward's head turned sharply, nostrils flaring slightly as if he could taste the air. I hear him, he said, voice low. Carlyle held up a hand. We stopped. I stepped forward alone, because it was easier that way. Less noise. Less motion for Laurent to read. I pulled shadow magic in first, letting it settle around my body so my outline blended into the gaps between trunks. Then I set the trap. Field anchor, tight circle, small. Not wide like the school. Just enough to form a containment pocket around the path Laurent was likely taking. I felt the anchor bite into the soil. Then I laid 2 path limits, angled toward a natural choke point between thick trees. Jasper and Edward stayed behind me, tense. Carlyle watched calmly, eyes sharp. Then Laurent appeared. He stepped into view like he belonged in the forest. Tall. Pale. Composed. His eyes were bright and cautious. He didn't look frantic. He looked hungry and careful. He saw me immediately. His expression stayed polite, but his gaze sharpened. You, he said softly. I smiled lightly. Me, I replied happily. His eyes flicked past me toward the faint direction of town. Where is the girl? He asked, voice smooth. I kept my tone casual. Not here, I said. Laurent's lips curved faintly. You have power, he said calmly. That is clear. Edward made a low sound behind me, like he wanted to tear Laurent's throat out for saying anything about Bella or power. Carlyle's voice was quiet. Laurent, he said evenly. Leave Forks. Laurent's gaze shifted to Carlyle, polite. I have no quarrel with you, he said. I do not want conflict. Jasper's voice was low. Then go, he said. Laurent's eyes flicked toward Edward. And yet he wants conflict, Laurent said softly. Edward's face went cold. You came to a school, he said flatly. Laurent's expression didn't change much. I was curious, he replied calmly. James spoke of her. Then he died. Curiosity remained. Carlyle's tone stayed even. Curiosity will get you destroyed, he said. Laurent looked at Carlyle, then back at me. You are not like them, he said softly. What are you? I smiled. A problem for you, I replied cheerfully. Laurent's eyes narrowed slightly, and then he moved. He tried to slip past the choke point, aiming for a lighter path. He hit the path limit. His step stuttered. I cast. Chains snapped around his ankles and wrists instantly, tighter and cleaner than the school hallway version. He tore at them with strength, but I layered sealing and anti-magic together this time, because we weren't in public. We were in the forest, and I wanted him contained, not inconvenienced. Laurent hit the ground hard, leaves and wet dirt shifting under his shoulder. He snarled, surprised. Edward lunged forward. Stop, Carlyle said sharply, still calm but firmer than usual. Edward froze mid-step, jaw clenched. Jasper moved to Edward's side and held him back with presence, not force. Edward, he said, voice low and controlled. Edward's eyes stayed locked on Laurent, hate and disgust mixing. Laurent looked up at me, eyes bright, expression shifting from polite to wary. You can restrain me, he said quietly. Yes, I replied, calm. And I can keep you restrained. Laurent's gaze flicked between Carlyle and Edward. This is about the girl, he said softly. Edward's voice was flat. You do not say her name, he said. Laurent's lips pressed together. He looked almost amused. You love her, he said quietly. Edward's shoulders tightened like the words were a slap. Carlyle's voice stayed even. Laurent, he said. We are not negotiating in the forest. You will be contained until we decide what to do. Laurent's eyes narrowed. Contained, he repeated. Rosalie stepped into view from the side, expression cold. Emmett appeared behind her, posture ready, eyes bright. Emmett whistled softly. Caught him, he said. Rosalie's voice was flat. Good, she said. Laurent tried to surge again, testing. The anti-magic layer slowed him. The seal held. His movement stuttered, and he stopped, expression tightening with frustration. I crouched near him, keeping my voice light. Try less, I said happily. It's not working. Laurent's eyes flicked to me. You are dangerous, he said calmly. Yes, I replied. Edward's voice was tight. Where is Victoria? He demanded. Laurent's gaze shifted to Edward, and his expression stayed composed. I do not know, he said softly. Edward's jaw clenched. Lie, he said flatly. Laurent didn't flinch. I left her, he said, voice smooth. Her grief was unpleasant. Rosalie scoffed. Grief, she said coldly. Carlyle watched Laurent carefully. You are not aligned with her, Carlyle said evenly. Laurent's eyes flicked to Carlyle. I am aligned with survival, he replied. Jasper's voice was low. You came here anyway, he said evenly. Laurent's lips pressed together. Curiosity, he repeated. Edward stared at him, face hard. You smelled Bella, he said. Laurent didn't deny it. Yes, he replied calmly. Edward's hands clenched so hard the tendons stood out. Carlyle stepped slightly in front of Edward again, a calm barrier. We will move him, Carlyle said evenly. Away from roads. Emmett nodded once. I'll carry him, he offered. Rosalie's eyes narrowed. Don't be rough, she said coldly. I want him intact until Carlyle decides. Emmett rolled his eyes. Fine, he said. I tightened the chains into a transport bundle similar to Victoria's, less complex because Laurent hadn't shown the same self-injury escape pattern. He thrashed once, then stilled when the lock bit in. Edward kept staring at him like he wanted him gone permanently. Jasper leaned slightly toward Edward and spoke quietly. Breathe, he said, controlled. Edward snapped, I don't breathe, then went still again, jaw clenched. Carlyle's tone stayed even. Edward, he said gently, you did well not reacting in the hallway. Do not lose that control now. Edward's eyes flashed, but he nodded once, stiff. We moved Laurent deeper into the forest toward the holding area where Victoria was already contained, keeping distance so their sense and presence didn't create a mess. The goal wasn't to host a vampire meeting. The goal was containment. As we carried him, Laurent's gaze stayed alert, watching all of us, measuring. He didn't panic. He didn't plead. He looked like someone deciding what words might keep him alive. When we reached the edge of the containment zone, I paused and looked at Carlyle. Separate rings, I said calmly. Carlyle nodded. Yes, he said evenly. I set a second containment pocket for Laurent, smaller, tighter, with more anti-magic layered so he couldn't burst through with speed. Jasper watched my hands closely. Edward did too, and I could feel Edward memorizing each step. When Laurent was secured, Carlyle stepped closer to him, voice calm. If you intended no conflict, Carlyle said, then you will cooperate. Laurent's expression stayed polite. What do you want? He asked. Carlyle didn't dramatize it. Distance, he said evenly. From Forks. From the girl. From any path that leads to her. Laurent's eyes flicked briefly toward Edward. And if I agree, he said softly. Carlyle's tone stayed calm. Then you leave, he said. And you do not return. Edward's jaw clenched. He should be destroyed, he said flatly. Carlyle looked at Edward steadily. Edward, he said gently. Edward's eyes hardened. He came to the school, he said. I know, Carlyle replied evenly. And we stopped it without exposing Bella to more scrutiny. That matters. Rosalie's expression stayed cold. He's still a risk, she said. Jasper's voice was low. He's also not Victoria, he said evenly. Emmett muttered, he's still annoying, then shut up when Rosalie looked at him. I stayed relaxed, but my focus didn't leave. Laurent wasn't harmless. He was just more cautious than James. That meant he could be negotiated with, which also meant he could lie. Carlyle made a small decision with his posture, stepping back slightly. We will discuss further, he said evenly. For now, you remain contained. Laurent didn't argue. He simply watched. Edward looked at me then, voice tight. The school field, he said. It's set, I replied. Edward's eyes narrowed. And Charlie's property, he said. At dawn, I replied. Like planned. Edward's jaw clenched, but he didn't fight it now. He'd seen that containment worked better when we followed the plan. Jasper glanced at Edward, then spoke quietly. You did fine, he said again. Edward's mouth tightened. Stop saying that, he replied flatly. Jasper didn't react. Carlyle looked at all of us. We return, he said evenly. We rotate. We keep Bella's routine as normal as possible. Kai's fields reduce surprise. Training reduces mistakes. And we remain quiet around Charlie. Edward's eyes hardened. I will see her at school, he said, clipped. Carlyle nodded once. Yes, he said. Alice's voice came through the phone again, quick and tense. Bella is asleep, she said. Charlie is asleep too, finally. No new decision lines. Edward's shoulders lowered by a fraction, relief leaking out again. I looked at Edward and kept my tone light. Good, I said. Now you can stop looking like you're going to bite a mailbox. Edward shot me a look full of irritation. Emmett snorted. Rosalie's eyes narrowed, but she didn't speak. We left the holding site with the forest still wet and quiet behind us, 2 contained threats held at distance, and the school field in place to catch anything else that tried to slide into Bella's day unnoticed.